After paying for an elderly man's coffee, the manager fires her. 2 hours later, everyone was emotional. In the bustling city of Portland, Oregon, Sarah Foster, a 41-year-old woman with honey-colored eyes and wavy brown hair, hurried along the rain-slicked streets towards the Golden Roast Cafe. The sun was just beginning to peek through the grey clouds when Sarah arrived at the local coffee shop, her second home for over a decade. "Morning, Sarah," greeted Ernest the baker as he placed a tray of freshly baked muffins on the counter. "Good morning, Ernest," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "How's your wife doing?" "Getting better, thank God." "And your mum?" Sarah sighed. "The same. The medications are expensive, but we're managing." As she put on her apron, Sarah thought of her 16-year-old daughter, Emma, who was probably still asleep at home. The image of her mother, Linda, bedridden due to a degenerative illness, also crossed her mind. She shook her head, focusing on the work ahead. The morning unfolded as usual, the aroma of freshly ground coffee, the clinking of cups, and the murmur of conversations from regular customers. Sarah moved gracefully between tables, serving cappuccinos and lattes with a smile that hid the weight of her worries. Near noon, when the flow of customers decreased, the bell above the door chimed. An elderly man with a disheveled appearance stumbled in. Sarah approached him cautiously. "Welcome to the Golden Roast, sir. Can I help you?" The man looked at her with eyes clouded by confusion. I think I'm lost." "Where am I?" Sarah gently guided him to a table. "You're in a coffee shop, sir. Would you like to sit down and have something?" The old man nodded gratefully. "A coffee and... do you have carrot cake?" "Of course," Sarah replied, noticing the man's worn clothes and air of helplessness. As she served the elderly man, Sarah couldn't help but think of her own mother. Would she one day wander the streets confused? The idea made her heart ache. After an hour, the old man seemed to regain some lucidity. "I think I should go," he said, searching his pockets. Panic filled his face when he couldn't find his wallet. Sarah, who had been watching him, approached. "Don't worry, sir, I'll take care of it." Without hesitation, Sarah took money from her own pocket and paid the old man's bill. She helped him up and accompanied him to the door. "Thank you, dear," the old man mumbled, tears in his eyes. "God bless you." Sarah watched him walk away, feeling a mix of satisfaction and worry. She didn't notice that Richard, the manager, was observing her with a frown from behind the counter. That night, as she was closing the cafe, Richard called her into his office. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said sternly. "I saw what you did today with that homeless man." "He wasn't homeless, Richard. He was a confused elderly man who needed help." "That's not the point. You can't give away cafe products." "I didn't give them away," Sarah protested. "I paid for them." Richard sighed in exasperation. "That's not the protocol, Sarah. And it's not the first time you've done something like this. Last week you gave free coffee to that pregnant woman who wasn't feeling well. But I'm sorry, Sarah. You're an excellent employee, but I can't allow you to keep taking these liberties. You're fired." The words fell like a bucket of cold water on Sarah. "Please, Richard, I need this job. My mother is sick. My daughter... I'm sorry. It's my final decision." Sarah left the cafe with tears in her eyes, wondering how she would tell Emma and Linda that she had lost her job because of an act of kindness. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. Every morning she woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare, only to face the harsh reality of her unemployment. Emma, her teenage daughter, tried to cheer her up while looking for part-time jobs to help. "Mom, don't worry," Emma would say, as they reviewed the job listings in the local newspaper together. "Something will come up. You're the best barista in all of Portland." Sarah smiled weakly, grateful for her daughter's optimism, but worry was eating her up inside. Their savings were rapidly dwindling, and Linda's medications couldn't wait. One afternoon, as Sarah returned from another fruitless job search, she found Emma waiting for her at the door of their modest apartment, with an expression of contained excitement. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," Emma exclaimed as soon as she saw her. "What is it, sweetie?" Sarah asked, intrigued by her daughter's excitement. "You got a call. A Mr. Alexander Morgan wants to see you tomorrow at the Golden Roast. He says it's urgent." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Alexander Morgan? That name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Did it have something to do with her dismissal? The next morning, Sarah dressed in her best blouse and headed to the cafe with a mix of nervousness and curiosity. As she entered, she noticed the atmosphere was different. The employees looked at her with a mixture of respect and something that seemed like admiration. Richard, the manager who had fired her, approached her with an uncomfortable expression. "Sarah, Mr. Morgan is waiting for you in the office." With her heart pounding, Sarah entered the office that once belonged to Richard. There, sitting behind the desk, was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mrs. Foster, please have a seat," the man said, rising to greet her. "I'm Alexander Morgan, the owner of the Golden Roast." Sarah sat down surprised. She had never met the owner in all her years working there. "Mr. Morgan, it's a pleasure to meet you, but I don't understand," Alexander gently interrupted her. "Mrs. Foster, the man you helped a few days ago, paying his bill out of your own pocket, was my father." Sarah felt the air escape from her lungs. "Your father?" "That's right. My father, Mr. Gabriel Morgan, suffers from Alzheimer's. That day he escaped from home and wandered the city for hours. We were desperately looking for him." Alexander paused, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "When we finally found him, he couldn't stop talking about an angel who had helped him in a coffee shop. It took us a while to understand what had happened, until we investigated and discovered your act of kindness." Sarah blushed. "Anyone would have done the same, Mr. Morgan?" "No, Sarah, not anyone. And it wasn't just that. I've been investigating and I've discovered that it's not the first time you've gone above and beyond your duties to help customers." Alexander leaned forward. "That's exactly the kind of person I need running this place." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, confused. "I want to offer you the position of general manager of the Golden Roast." Sarah was speechless. General manager? Her? But Richard... "Richard has been transferred to another of our branches," Alexander explained. "We need someone with heart at the helm of this business, someone who understands that a coffee shop is more than just selling coffee. It's about creating a space of community, of human warmth, and you, Sarah, perfectly embody those values." Tears of emotion began to form in Sarah's eyes. "Mr. Morgan, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Alexander smiled. "The salary will be considerably higher than what you had before, and you'll have flexibility to manage your schedules. I know about your family situation, and I want you to know that at the Golden Roast, we value work-life balance." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was as if all her problems were being solved at once. "Yes," she finally said, her voice trembling but firm. "I accept. I promise I won't let you down." "I'm sure of that," Alexander replied, shaking her hand. "Welcome aboard, Manager Foster." When Sarah left the office, she saw the employees gathered, looking at her expectantly. With a radiant smile, she announced, "Looks like I'm going to need a new apron." The applause and cheers that followed were deafening. Sarah found herself surrounded by hugs and congratulations. For the first time in weeks, she felt she could breathe deeply. The future, which had seemed so bleak before, now shone with possibilities. That night, as she shared the news with Emma and Linda, Sarah reflected on how a simple act of kindness had changed the course of her life. She didn't know what challenges awaited her in her new role, but she was determined to face them with the same compassion and ethics that had brought her this far. What Sarah didn't know was that her real challenge was just beginning, and that soon she would face decisions that would test her integrity and everything she believed in. The following months were a whirlwind of changes for Sarah. As the new general manager of the Golden Roast, she immersed herself in her work with renewed passion. Her days began before dawn and ended long after sunset, but the satisfaction of seeing the cafe thrive under her leadership made every extra hour worthwhile. Sarah implemented subtle but significant changes. She introduced a suspended coffee policy, where customers could pay for an extra coffee that would be reserved for someone who couldn't afford it. She organized open mic nights for local artists and began sourcing coffee beans from small producers in the region. The atmosphere at the Golden Roast changed. The employees, inspired by Sarah's example, began to treat customers with a level of warmth and attention that soon became famous throughout Portland. The cafe became a meeting point, not just for good coffee, but to experience a true sense of community. One afternoon, while Sarah was reviewing the accounts in her office, she noticed something strange. There were discrepancies in the numbers, small inconsistencies that didn't match the reported income. At first, she thought it was a calculation error, but the more she investigated, the clearer it became that something wasn't right. With a heavy heart, Sarah decided to talk to Alexander Morgan. Maybe he could shed some light on the situation. "Alexander, I need to talk to you about something important," Sarah said, closing the owner's office door. Alexander, who was reviewing some documents, looked up with a smile that faded when he saw Sarah's serious expression. "What's wrong, Sarah?" "I've found some irregularities in the accounts," Sarah explained, spreading the documents on the desk. "There's money that's not being reported correctly." Alexander's expression changed, a shadow crossing his face. "Ah, that," he said, in a tone that surprised Sarah. "Don't worry about that, Sarah. They're necessary accounting adjustments." Sarah frowned. "But Alexander, this doesn't seem right. If we're not reporting all our income, we'd be evading taxes." Alexander stood up, walking to the window. "Sarah, there are things about the business you don't understand. Sometimes it's necessary to handle things a certain way to keep the business afloat." "But listen," Alexander interrupted, turning to her. "You've done a wonderful job here. The cafe has never been better. But there are aspects of the business that it's better you leave in my hands. Do you understand?" Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. The man standing before her bore no resemblance to the Alexander Morgan who had hired her months ago. "No, Alexander, I don't understand," Sarah replied, keeping calm. "If there's something illegal happening here, I can't be part of it." Alexander sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sarah, you're an intelligent woman. You know how difficult it is to keep a business running these days. These adjustments allow us to continue operating, pay salaries, keep prices low for our customers. But at the cost of deceiving the government and the community that supports us," Sarah replied. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Alexander said, his voice hardening, "and I suggest you drop the subject. Remember, you have a family to support. You wouldn't want to put your job at risk, would you?" Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. Was that a threat? The image of her sick mother and her daughter Emma crossed her mind. What would she do if she lost this job? "I need time to think," she finally said, collecting the documents. "Take all the time you need," Alexander replied, his tone softening. "But remember, Sarah, we're a family here at the Golden Roast, and families protect each other." Sarah left the office with her head spinning. In a matter of minutes, her world had been turned upside down. The job she loved, the man she admired, everything seemed tainted now. That night, as she prepared dinner for Emma and Linda, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Alexander. How had she gone from being an angel to an accomplice in fraud in such a short time? "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing her mother's distraction. "You seem worried." Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine, honey. Just tired from work. Are you sure? You know you can tell me anything, right?" Sarah looked at her daughter, feeling a wave of pride and love. Emma was no longer a child. She was becoming an intelligent and compassionate young woman. What example would she be setting if she decided to ignore what she had discovered? "Emma," Sarah began, sitting next to her daughter, "what would you do if you discovered that someone you admire is doing something wrong?" Emma reflected for a moment. "I guess I'd try to talk to that person, understand why they're doing it, and if I can't convince them to do the right thing, I'd seek help." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "You're very wise, my girl." "Mom, is something happening at work?" Emma asked, concerned. Sarah made a decision at that moment. She couldn't lie to her daughter or to herself. "Yes, honey. I've discovered something that isn't right, and now I have to decide what to do about it." "And what are you going to do?" Sarah took a deep breath. "The right thing, Emma. I'm going to do the right thing, even if it's difficult." That night, after putting her mother to bed and making sure Emma was asleep, Sarah sat in the living room with a cup of tea. She knew the following days would be crucial. She would have to face not only Alexander, but also her own fears and insecurities. As she looked out the window at the lights of Portland, Sarah remembered her late father's words. "Daughter, integrity isn't something you put on and take off like a hat. It's who you are even when no one is looking." With those words resonating in her mind, Sarah began to devise a plan. She didn't know exactly how, but she was determined to set things right at the Golden Roast, regardless of the personal cost. What she didn't know was that her decision would trigger a series of events that would not only change her life, but would have an impact on the entire Portland community and beyond. The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Sarah. Each morning as she entered the Golden Roast, she felt the weight of her knowledge like an invisible burden. She watched customers enjoying their coffees, employees working enthusiastically, and wondered how she could protect all the good they had built while facing the truth about the cafe's financial practices. She decided that before taking any drastic action, she would try once more to reason with Alexander. Perhaps if she presented him with an alternative plan, she could convince him to do the right thing. She spent entire nights researching, consulting with an old accountant friend, and developing a detailed plan to restructure the Golden Roast's finances legally and transparently. It would be difficult at first, but Sarah was convinced that in the long run, honesty would bring greater benefits. A week after her initial discovery, Sarah requested another meeting with Alexander. "Alexander, I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation," Sarah began, placing a folder on the desk, "and I think I've found a solution." Alexander looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I'm listening." Sarah opened the folder and began to explain her plan. She talked about cutting unnecessary expenses, restructuring suppliers, loyalty programs to increase sales. She showed projections indicating how, although the first few months would be tight, in the long term the cafe could be even more profitable operating completely legally. And most importantly, Sarah concluded, we could sleep soundly knowing we're doing the right thing. Alexander remained silent for several minutes, studying the documents. Finally, he looked up at Sarah. "You've done an impressive job, Sarah," he said in a tired voice, "and part of me wishes I could say, yes, let's do this. But what, Alexander?" Sarah pressed. "What's stopping us from doing the right thing?" Alexander stood up and walked to the window, his posture revealing a fatigue Sarah hadn't noticed before. "The truth is that the situation is more complicated than you think," he began. "These irregularities didn't start with me. My father, Gabriel Morgan, initiated them years ago when the cafe was on the brink of bankruptcy. It was either that or close and leave dozens of families without a livelihood." Sarah listened, feeling a mixture of understanding and dismay. "When I inherited the business," Alexander continued, "I promised my father I would maintain his legacy, that I would protect our family of employees. And for years that's what I've done, but you're right, Sarah. This can't continue." He turned to her with a look of determination on his face. "Let's do it. Let's implement your plan." Sarah felt a wave of relief and hope. "Really, are you sure?" "Yes," Alexander nodded, "but we have to do it gradually. If we suddenly start declaring all our income, we'll raise suspicions. We need a transition plan." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and Alexander worked tirelessly, reviewing every aspect of the business. They informed the staff about the upcoming changes, emphasizing that although there would be some adjustments, the goal was to ensure a stable and ethical future for everyone. However, not everything was easy. Some employees, accustomed to certain undeclared benefits, were reluctant. There were heated discussions and even threats of resignation. But Sarah remained firm, leading by example and patiently explaining why these changes were necessary. As they implemented the plan, Sarah noticed subtle but significant changes in the cafe's atmosphere. There was a new energy, a sense of pride among the employees that went beyond simply making good coffee. They were building something honest, something they could truly be proud of. One afternoon, as Sarah was overseeing the implementation of a new inventory system, Alexander approached her with a smile. "You know, Sarah," he said, "when I hired you, I thought I was doing a favor to the daughter of a good man who helped my father. But the truth is, you've done us all a favor. You've brought integrity back to the Golden Roast." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I just did what I believed was right." "And that," Alexander replied, "is exactly what we needed." That night, as Sarah shared dinner with Emma and Linda, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, she felt they were heading in the right direction. What Sarah didn't know was that her actions had set in motion a series of events that would soon capture the attention not just of Portland, but of all of Oregon. The real challenge and the real reward were yet to come. The following months were a mix of triumphs and challenges for Sarah and the team at the Golden Roast. The implementation of the new financial system brought with it a series of unexpected obstacles. Some suppliers, accustomed to the old practices, were reluctant to accept the new transparent contracts. There were weeks when it seemed that for every step forward, they took 2 steps back. However, Sarah remained firm in her conviction. Every morning before opening the cafe, she gathered all the staff for a brief motivational talk. "Remember," she would say, "we're not just serving coffee, we're serving integrity." Little by little, the changes began to bear fruit. Customers noticed an improvement in the quality of service and products. The atmosphere in the cafe was more cheerful, more authentic. The employees, initially skeptical, began to feel a renewed sense of pride in their work. One day, while Sarah was personally attending to customers, a practice she maintained despite her managerial position, a woman approached her with a smile. "Excuse me," the woman said, "are you the manager?" Sarah nodded, wondering if there was a problem. "I just wanted to tell you that I've been coming to this cafe for years, and I've never seen it so vibrant. There's something different in the air, you know? It feels honest." Those words resonated with Sarah for days. It was the confirmation she needed that they were on the right path. However, just when things seemed to be stabilizing, the storm arrived. One morning, Sarah arrived at the cafe to find Alexander waiting for her with a grave expression. "Sarah, we have a problem," he said, guiding her to the office. "The IRS has initiated an audit." Sarah's heart sank. Although they had been working to correct the irregularities, they knew there were still traces of the old practices in the books. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, feeling that everything they had worked for could crumble. Alexander looked at her with determination. "We're going to tell the truth. The whole truth." The following days were a whirlwind of meetings with accountants and lawyers. Sarah and Alexander decided to adopt a strategy of total transparency. They presented the authorities with a detailed report of past irregularities, along with the plan they had implemented to correct them. The news of the audit leaked quickly. Suddenly, the Golden Roast found itself at the center of a media storm. Local journalists began to lurk around the cafe, seeking the story behind the financial scandal. Sarah faced the situation with courage. Instead of hiding, she decided to face it head-on. She organized a press conference in the cafe itself, with all the employees present. "Yes, we made mistakes in the past," she said in front of the cameras, "but we're working tirelessly to correct them. The Golden Roast isn't just a cafe, it's a family, a vital part of this community. And we're committed to being an example of integrity and transparency." Her honesty and frankness captured the public's attention. What began as a local scandal soon became a story of redemption and business ethics that resonated throughout Oregon. Loyal customers and new ones began to arrive en masse, not just for the coffee, but to show their support for a business that was trying to do the right thing. However, not everything was positive. The IRS investigation continued, and there were days when Sarah feared all her effort would be in vain. The nights became long, filled with worry and doubt. One afternoon, while Sarah was reviewing documents in the office, Emma unexpectedly arrived at the cafe. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, noticing Sarah's dark circles. "I've seen the news. Everyone at school is talking about it." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. In the midst of all the chaos, she had neglected her family. "I'm fine, honey, just a little tired." Emma sat in front of her. "Mom, I'm proud of you. I know it's hard, but you're doing the right thing." Her daughter's words were like a balm for Sarah's tired soul. She remembered why she had started all this: to be an example, to do the right thing, not just for the business, but for her family and her community. Renewed by Emma's support, Sarah redoubled her efforts. She organized ethics training sessions for all staff, implemented an anonymous suggestion system to improve transparency, and even invited business ethics experts to give talks at the cafe. The Golden Roast became a symbol of change and hope in Portland. Other local businesses, inspired by their example, began to review their own practices. Finally, after weeks of investigation, the day of the IRS verdict arrived. Sarah and Alexander waited in the office, their hearts in their throats. The IRS official entered with a serious expression. "Mrs. Foster, Mr. Morgan, we have concluded our investigation." There was a moment of silence that seemed eternal. "I must say," the official continued, "that in my years of service I've never seen a case like this. You've made mistakes, yes, but your transparency and your efforts to correct them are exemplary." Sarah and Alexander exchanged looks of relief and surprise. "There will be fines, of course," the official added, "but given the nature of your cooperation and your corrective efforts, they will be considerably less. Moreover, the Golden Roast will be cited as a case study in business ethics." When the official left, Sarah and Alexander hugged, tears mixing with laughter of relief. "We did it," Alexander whispered. "Thanks to you, Sarah. You saved more than the cafe. You saved its soul." The news spread quickly. That night, the cafe filled with customers, employees, and their families, all celebrating not just the end of the investigation, but the triumph of integrity. In the midst of the celebration, Sarah found herself surrounded by reporters. A young journalist asked her, "Mrs. Foster, what's next now for the Golden Roast?" Sarah smiled, looking around at the happy faces of her employees, at Emma, who was watching her with pride, at Alexander, who was nodding in support. "Now," she replied, "we continue serving more than coffee. We serve hope, integrity, and an example that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always worth it." As the party continued, Sarah realized that this wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. The real challenge was just beginning, maintaining this standard of ethics and inspiring others to follow their example. The months following the IRS resolution were a period of transformation, not just for the Golden Roast, but for the entire Portland community. Sarah's story and her struggle for integrity had become a catalyst for change. The Golden Roast experienced an unprecedented boom. Customers from all over Oregon began to arrive, attracted not only by the excellent coffee, but by the story of redemption and ethics that was now an integral part of the brand. Sarah found herself giving interviews to national media, sharing her experience and encouraging other entrepreneurs to adopt transparent practices. But for Sarah, true success wasn't measured in dollars or media coverage. It was measured in the impact they were having on people's lives. One morning, as Sarah was overseeing the cafe's opening, Jake, one of the youngest baristas, approached her. "Ms. Foster," he said with a shy smile, "I wanted to thank you. Thanks to the new benefits and the salary increase, I was able to enroll in college. I'm going to study business administration." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "I'm very proud of you, Jake, and remember, the most important lesson in business isn't learned from books. It's about doing the right thing, always." Inspired by stories like Jake's, Sarah decided to take it a step further. In collaboration with Alexander, she launched a mentoring program for young entrepreneurs in Portland. The Golden Roast became a learning center where aspiring business owners could learn about ethical business practices and social responsibility. The impact extended beyond the walls of the cafe. Other local businesses, inspired by the Golden Roast's example, began to adopt more transparent policies. The local Chamber of Commerce invited Sarah to give talks on business ethics, and soon Portland began to gain a reputation as a hub for ethical and sustainable businesses. One day, while Sarah was enjoying a rare moment of tranquility in the cafe, an older woman approached her. "Excuse me," the woman said, "are you Sarah Foster?" Sarah nodded with a smile. "I just wanted to tell you that your story inspired me to report unethical practices at my workplace," the woman continued. "It was difficult, but I thought of you and found the courage to do it. Thank you for being an example." These interactions constantly reminded Sarah why she had decided to fight for integrity in the first place. It wasn't just about a business, it was about creating a positive impact on society. As the Golden Roast grew, Sarah made sure they never lost sight of their core values. She implemented an ethics code that all employees had to follow and established an internal ethics committee to handle any issues that might arise. The success of the Golden Roast didn't go unnoticed at the national level. One day, Sarah received an unexpected call. The Department of Commerce wanted her to be part of an advisory committee on ethical practices in small and medium-sized businesses. It's a great opportunity, Sarah, Alexander told her when she shared the news. You could help change things at a national level. Sarah felt honored, but also overwhelmed. How could she handle this new responsibility and continue running the cafe? It was Emma who gave her the perspective she needed. "Mom," she said one night as they were having dinner, "you've always taught me that when you have the opportunity to do good, you should take it. This is your chance to do good on a large scale." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she reflected on the incredible journey she had embarked on, from being a simple waitress to becoming a national symbol of business integrity. She remembered the day she helped that confused old man, not knowing that that simple act of kindness would change the course of her life. The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the cafe. The aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air, mixing with the smell of freshly baked pastries. The employees arrived one by one, greeting with genuine smiles. Sarah watched them with pride, aware that each of them was an integral part of this transformation story. As she prepared her first cup of coffee for the day, Sarah made a decision. She would accept the position on the advisory committee. She would use her experience, her mistakes, and her triumphs to help others find the path of integrity. The Golden Roast was no longer just a cafe. It had become a movement, a symbol of what is possible when one chooses to do the right thing even when it's difficult. Sarah looked out the window towards the Portland streets that were beginning to come to life with the dawn. She smiled, knowing that each day would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. The aroma of coffee now mixed with something else, the aroma of change, of hope, of a brighter and more ethical future for everyone. And so, with a cup of coffee in hand and a heart full of purpose, Sarah Foster prepared for the next chapter of her extraordinary adventure. She knew that as long as she maintained her integrity and compassion, there was no limit to the good she could do in the world.